I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost I would like to say thank you for viewing this video. The topic of this video will be on melancholia and intuition. And the reason this topic came to my mind is that recently I've had quite a few dialogues with my NT and NF friends, and there is a tendency or a pattern or a trait, and I've spoke of this in the NF's need for meaning and their existential burden, but there's a pattern and a trait that I'm beginning to realize is something that comes, and that is a tendency towards melancholia, and that is by way of NI, SE, NE, and SI. It is something that is fundamental to intuition, and I think it's something that comes with intuition because what intuition does for an individual's psyche is always causes them to go beyond the scope of what's apparent in front of them, per se. And this plays itself out differently within the NT psyche and the NF psyche, but there is a similarity and a connection between the two insofar as that intuition does not preserve one's perception and expectation of their immediate environment. And what I mean by that is this, that you may have some personality types that do suffer, or you may have some personality types that don't suffer, per se. Let's go with the sterile case. You have some individuals who have a rather average life, and there's nothing seemingly wrong in their local environment or with their local experience, but one day they find themselves watching the news and they learn of a plight or a struggle that is in some foreign land, in some foreign country, and that causes a great deal of discontentment in them for the status of the world, some sort of consternation or some sort of sorrow for what's going on. And if they're an NT or an NF, there's different inflections and moods that this will create in the individual. But it's to say this, that what intuition does for an individual in the world is not allow them to stay in the context that they readily exist in. So it is the ability to extend and to extrapolate phenomenon, experiences, and ideas across time in a very cross-contextual manner. And this power to be able to see things and extend and connect them and associate them with things that are beyond oneself is a great deal and source of creativity, but is also a source of it can be a source of melancholia, and depending on whether or not they find themselves being feeling types or thinking types, can bring a tremendous amount of suffering in the mind of the individual. But it's to say that when one can take their experience and extrapolate from their experience what may be the general experience of the world, one then sees a greater frontier or a greater sense of urgency or disappointment. And I think that that's what you see insofar as why NFs are driven towards being activist, or NFs have existential burdens, or NTs are driven to be political leaders, or NTs are driven to scientific and philosophical breakthroughs, and by way of trying to change the way we think Friedrich Nietzsche is a great example of this because he could look at the German intellectual sphere and realize the growing skepticism and doubt towards faith, or the general disbelief in the once held spiritual and metaphysical assumptions of the German sphere, see these things emerging in himself and his colleagues, and then project and saw that it would not stay there, but this would be something that would sweep the entire Western and Eastern European continent. And it would be something that swept the Eastern and Western European continent, and it would not go without great consequence or great cost, and why he was able to predict the advent of World War I and World War II. Same thing of Dostoevsky, the writer, who is an INFJ. He realized that there was a growing disbelief in Judeo-Christian ideals, and that the advent of deism was only a stepping stone towards atheism, and he essentially equated that the idea of an impersonal God was only a stone's throw away of there being no God. And really, when atheism was at its very early conceptions and was nascent, Dostoevsky said it before Nietzsche, that God is dead, and if God is dead, then all is permitted. And he wasn't saying that there would be an end to morality per se, but there would be an end to meaning, and that nihilism was coming, and because of the advent of nihilism, there would be a sway towards totalitarian systems and regimes, which is what he demonstrated in the Brothers Karamazov, and he was trying to provide anecdotes and answers to that dilemma, and it's the same thing that Nietzsche was trying to do, and they were both working independently. Essentially, Dostoevsky from a they were both working from a philosophical standpoint, and both the psychological one, as they were greatly, they were really the first psychologists, Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, Schopenhauer as well. They were so insightful and able to see what made up the minds of men and women in their time, and what was the collective, and Hegel as well, the collective mindset of the Western European landscape. And they greatly influenced Carl Jung and Freud in their thinking and their conception and development of depth psychology. The reason I give these examples and illustrations is to say that intuition, no matter the level of intelligence, but the intuition in the individual will make it so that the individual will never stop with their own local experience. Or if the individual does, they in a sense, they cannot go without committing some sort of intellectual suicide, or lying to themselves, or having some sort of alleviation to the greater tenet to associate and be stricken with ideas that extend outside of oneself or the context of one's immediate experiences. Many times, at least Friedrich Nietzsche postulated that the need for Christianity in the European frontier was to answer the question and the dilemma of pain and suffering in life, essentially that it was unavoidable, and so there needed to be another world or a metaphysical entity or existence that could be in the cosmos, to show that the cosmos was not indifferent towards human existence, so that we could derive some sort of meaning, that the weak, that the sickly, that the well suited, that the unenlightened, that the enlightened, that the thoughtful or the ignorant or whomever, even the criminal, that they all could be brought under one regime and given meaning and fulfillment, essentially a way to abrogate or disavow the contentious relationship there is in existence in our by way of our own phenomenological experience and the way that nature and the environment interacts on us and the way that we're constructed when we're brought here. Essentially, there's a lot of randomness and chaos that exists in life, and there are so many factors that we don't get to determine. But for the N type, whether they are an introverted intuitive type or an extroverted intuitive type, that those things will be brought to them. For their eyes cannot prevent them from seeing things. Their senses cannot prevent them from associating things. It is that we will, whether or not by our own volition, we will get outside of ourselves and we will take the world into consideration. We will take life into consideration. We will take the greater abstract aspects to what it means to be human, essentially, and commune and live with them. Even if we have the most cush and privileged existences, because you see it in the stories of the Buddhas, of Buddha, or you see it in the biography of Mahatma Gandhi, we will not stay in our localized sphere. We will not stay in our localized sphere. We're not S-types. So we're not concerned necessarily with the, purely with the punctuation of an experience or the arousal and stimulation that the environment can offer us, like an extroverted sensor. And we're not concerned, we're not firstly security seeking. We're not necessarily security seeking like the introverted sensing type. So we are, in a way, we don't have anything that acts as anchors or buoys to our local environment. And because of that, we are going to get outside of it. In whatever way, we're going to step out. We're going to be the ones to adventure and embark outside of what's known and what's safe. And it's not really the intuitive's choice in the matter, but that our brain goes there, and if we don't even physically change locale, we will intellectually change locale perception without question, oftentimes in our lives, even without attempt. And it's to say that we never know what we explore. We don't know, per se, what we're going out and what we're facing. Because we are, and I think that any intuitive type can relate to this, and why it can have the symptom of melancholia, and why we can carry it, because we never know what we're going out to explore. We never know what we're going out to do, per se. We are led to what's unknown, and we are led by way of our need to associate and to see the bigger picture out there. And in Buddha's case, he was a princely individual, and he was a part of royalty. He left his estate by chance because he was exploratory and wanted to see the countryside. But then when he saw the life of the people within the kingdom, he could no longer go back to what he knew, because now he had seen, and it had been made known to him, the suffering that was taking place around him, and the psychological makeup of people in general, and he could peer into their minds, which is why I think that Buddha is archetypally an INFJ, per se, but he could peer into the minds of these individuals and see what was the root cause and the best solution in terms of the context of the time that he was living in, and the best manifestation of ideas by way of Hinduism. And it's what many scholars of Buddhism say, is that Buddhism is the recapitulation of Hinduism, just Hinduism and the divine truth of Hinduism, with the individual and the self at the center. And that's essentially what Siddhartha Gautama did, and where Buddhism arose from. But if he does not make the pilgrimage, and if he doesn't have the intuition and the ability to see into the individual's minds and extend his experience beyond himself, you don't have what we have in the modern philosophical system that you do have in Buddhism. And it's something that's very much in Mahatma Gandhi, because he wasn't royalty, but he was involved in law, and he was very intelligent, and his family had a great deal of money, and he was well educated. He was going to live a very secure, cush, and prominent life, and he could have been highly successful in one sphere, as he was able to get his hands on Christian, the Gospels and the New Testament, and read those things, and Western philosophy and European philosophy by way of his traveling to the colony of Britain. But when you would think, when he would come back to his homeland, that he would stay, but it was by way of being in Britain that he heard about the repression in India, and he had mixed feelings about this before he came to Britain. But once he left and he came back to India, and he saw what the imperial regime really created in his homeland, he could no longer stand for it, and it dropped his soul and made him downcast. And it's just to say that we can't live as types, as intuitive types. We cannot live in the world and be what the world wants us to be, per se. We will never stay in the lines. We may be children who can color in the coloring books in the lines, but our thoughts, our emotions, and our perceptions, what we perceive and are impressed upon by the world, will never be in line, per se, with what is already given. We do not deal with the givens. We do not deal with the accepted notions. And we're not at all comfortable in some respects unless we have certain factors at play, such as having some all-encompassing worldview. You may very well be a intuitive type, but you may have a very strong religious system or philosophical system. Maybe you are a Hegelian, maybe you are a Christian, maybe you are a Marxist, maybe you are are a feminist, or someone who holds tight to some sort of large overarching system that you have faith that will deliver essentially utopia or providence to mankind. So you may see the things that are here, but they may not greatly affect you because you have a hope in something else. And there is a Christian song that goes, "My hope is built on nothing less but Jesus' blood and righteousness." Yeah, I think I'm getting that right. That's how it goes, and so that's where you can essentially take out Jesus' name and put whatever totalitarian system of thought is, like, that's just a general description I'm giving it, and put that their hope is built on something, so the things will not affect them in the same way, nor will they think that there is a need to be concerned with them in the same way. But that's not always true, because Joan of Arc is a great example that you can be of a theological, have a very strong theological leaning, And Dostoevsky is another prime example. You can be Orthodoxy Christian, and you will not be safe insofar as that you will not escape being touched in some sense with a bit of melancholia in your life. It's not to say that everybody drops to nihilism and everybody drops to despair, or that everybody becomes completely cynical, or that everybody, there's a variation, but melancholia will touch every intuitive type. That's something I can be certain of. And it's to say that intuition is a great gift, but with great power comes great responsibility. Thank you, Uncle Ben. It's not even to say that with great power comes great responsibility, that there is a duality in all things. And NFs in particular, especially, NFs especially in particular, they can see that there is a beauty and a horror to almost everything. That nothing can maintain its purity in any sense, and that the only way things can maintain their purity is through their idealization and a striving towards the ideal and stepping away from the reality that exists insofar as what is extant in nature and what is extant in human nature are a collection of things, some things being good, some things being horrific, some things being beautiful, some things being absolutely terrifying. And it's because the world and nature, from my materialistic standpoint, is essentially indifferent to human want and concern. In NTs, we are at times rationally cynical. We are in a lot of ways rationally cynical. There's not even at times. We are rationally cynical, and we can walk around with nihilistic palettes of belief. I know plenty of NTs that are nihilistic. It just doesn't bother them. There's no emotion behind it, so it doesn't really worry them or concern them. Or their thinking imbues in their emotional world or in their deeply metaphysical and not at all completely rational insofar as intuition is not a rational function. It introduces or dominates everything with a sterility and a logical underpinning that can mitigate the things that really can get to and touch the NF in a way that will drag the NF down. The NT can be dragged down, but the NT won't necessarily be dragged down, but they will be touched. They just will be. And it's why they can have the attitude of indifference, as it's just that it is the way it is, and that's just how it is. And there's no sense in changing it. There's nothing you can do about it. And I may not like it, but that's what it is. So I'm not even going to bother about caring. I'm going to engineer something, or I'm going to do something about it, or I'm not going to do anything about it, because there's nothing that can be done, and there's no sense. It makes no logical sense to get upset about the things that you can't change and you can't do anything about. But we're human beings, so we are not completely rational, or we're not completely logical. It took me a while to realize that, per se, and it took me to have NF friends to see some things, to become a humanist and be more humanistic in my thoughts. But it's to say that intuition is the great extender of experience. It's the thing that gives us the great imagination and ability to create abstractions and create beauty and aesthetics insofar as intellectual aesthetic per se. And it's it's something that's powerful and necessary in terms of the human experience. Intuition is. However, it's not only that. And that's not all that it brings. And I think that every intuitive type knows this, whether they're extroverted or whether they're introverted. There is this thing I noticed in myself, insofar as it went with being an extroverted intuitive type, insofar as that I greatly crave novelty, and I'm wholly concerned with the originality in my work. But you can go through the world as a very dominant extroverted intuitive type and see things as just the redressing of other things. And I think that that's introverted sensing's way of interjecting stability and grounding the flightiness or the very transcendental nature of extroverted intuition. But that can bother me in some respects. And just that everything, even the most creative things, there may be nothing new under the sun. That's depressing sometimes for me, that there may be nothing new and there may be no hope in trying to create anything new, that there may be no such thing as originality per se. I've ventured those waters. I have an answer for it, and you can find it in a video. There is originality, but it's just what one has to consider by way of originality and where things come from in terms. There's no ex nihilo. There's no God and man in the sense that we can create anything that is completely new, that we don't take from the environment per se, but it is our volition and our abilities as human beings to recombine, reconstruct things and take a lot of different things and find what's fundamental, invariant, and unchanging about them and resynthesize them to be something completely new. I think that's the answer to my dilemma. That was my existential dilemma, very really, and that's why I have a great deal of sigh when I'm talking about it, because I kind of answered it. I kind of answered it, at least to satisfaction to this point. And I hope I don't ever have to go back to that one. But that's not the biggest woe or problem. And it's also, there's just so much that intuition can do. For the INFJ or the NISE axes, they will always see. They will always see what's going on, whether they want to or not. They will always see. And if they don't see, they're lying to themselves. I swear, at least I think it's that way. Or they have something that compensates for what they see, but they will always see. They cannot not see. And I do literally mean physically see what's going on in the world. And it's going to move them in some way. Even INTJs, that is why they're visionaries, or even ENTJs is why that they're visionary. It's because they're seeing things in the empirical world, and they're noticing greater and larger patterns, per se, about what it is they're seeing, and their mind is going to project it and play it out for them in terms of being able to come up with the answer of what's going to happen, or what people are really thinking, or whether these thoughts are going to lead us, per se. And I can resonate where the thoughts are going to lead us, because I have polar introverted intuition. And the only thing it does is tell me all the horrible things that certain thoughts and certain philosophical tenets will lead people. It always comes with doomsday messages. Like, I never get nice things. Like, I never will come up with, the market's moving this way, so we should make this new invention because it's polar, I guess. I don't know. It's just, it never comes up with anything new. It never, and I shouldn't say new, but it's always like, be careful, and you better watch for what's coming on the horizons, because this is gonna happen. But that's what's essentially in them, so they can't. And it's like why sometimes INTJs and INFJs can be hermits, because they don't want to see sometimes, It's just like you don't want to do it, and you don't want to deal with it, and you don't want to go there. It's there in the world. And it's just to say that intuition, we are jovial, because I think that you find it, especially in NPs, a very childlike nature and a wonder to us. But with the wonder, there always comes a horror. It's why you can talk to an ENFP and there's something very old about them, per se, when they're not being very extroverted and bubbly and gregarious and magnanimous. It's the same with INFPs. You can get past the very sweet and kind and benevolent one and see an individual that has to be ardently willful to withstand the winter, per se, that the world is inflicting upon them, or the horror that they have to see. So they need this robust and resolute character to them to deal with the sensitivity that they come with, because there are things that lurk in the world that are not very kind to them. Even NJs, they're not, they have a very real, resolute way to them, and a sense in we will overcome, but they're very aware and very, made very sickly, at least they can be, when you read Nietzsche, or when you read Martin Luther King, or when you read some of the things that Gandhi wrote, when you read just certain figures, there's a hope in them, because they're running from despair. They don't have that hope because they're not aware of what's disparaging and the downtrodden elements of life. It's why NFs and NTs can be so much to the world, per se, at least I think, so far as that they know what exists out there, and they know what's on both sides of the coin. They know what extends beyond our local conception and our limited realities. They know. Even if they don't want to know, they're going to know. Even if they don't want to see, they're going to see. And even if they don't want to make the associations, because sometimes life can ask you to make very hard associations in terms of how you want to think about people, or how you want to think about a thing or yourself. But even if they don't want to do it, if you're a thinking type, you're going to do it. And if you're a feeling type, you're eventually going to do it. And it's going to make you feel a certain way. If you're thinking, you may just say, I don't care. But if you're feeling, it's never an answer of I can't, or I don't care, or I can't care. So there's just this dilemma. And I think the answer, because I'm good at giving dilemmas, per se, but it's a tenet, and it's a something that I notice in intuitive types, this tendency towards melancholia. I think that an answer can be is that you go towards whatever it is and try and resolve the issue. But it's not to say that everybody is just grossly depressed or anything about life, but just that in intuitive types, they're going to be bothered by things, and they're going to notice things more often than not. And it's something that they experience, and they're going to be met with at a very early age. I think an intuitive type is disappointed by things, or things never maintain whatever picture it is that we come with when we're born. I don't know, but for example, for NFs, they have a cosmopoetic and mythopoetic lens to them. I think in T's we have a heroic and a grandeur. We care about heroism and grandeur, like big ideas or big things, and heroes and mythologies, and really elaborate and profound ideas. It's like the fact that infinity could exist, that things can go on forever. That's going to very much interest an NT child, or that there were dinosaurs and beasts of this size roam the earth at a certain point in time, or that there's billions of stars in the universe and the cosmos is something that's expansive and everything is accelerating and moving away, that the earth is something so very small in the grand scheme of things. Like NT children, they gravitate towards these things, and they have a picture of grandeur or heroicism in their mind. And in F's, they have this cosmopoetic and mythopoetic lens. It is just that we come born with these things. We don't ask for them. We come with them. It's just that they won't ever maintain in their integrity. And so far as that, the world will break the symmetries. The symmetries are always going to get broken. Whatever perfect picture we started with, by way, I think, of our intuition, because intuition is sort of this deal of filling in the missing gaps and spaces in between things. That's something our minds are driven towards. So we have, given our local environment or our local experiences, our interests, and our temperament, a certain picture, but then we come against the world, and the world is real, and that's why in F's and in T's, they're just as much, they're very much concerned interwovenly with reality and fantasy, because they experience what's real, per se, at a very early age. And I think that's why there is the tendency towards melancholia and intuitive types. Yeah, so that's my video, and maybe you found it interesting. Thank you for watching.